Welcome back to session 4 of the Journey in Consciousness. And why don't we start out again as we have each of these sessions sharing a moment of silence. Thank you. So, welcome everybody again. So, if you've been following along in the series, we've come a long way. We started out in the first session, starting with the state of infinite unconscious God in the beyond state. And we journeyed from there because of the whim of unconscious God to know who he was, or if you prefer, who he, she, they. I'm going to use the male because that's the pronoun Bobby used, who he was. And that then precipitated the manifesting of creation as the vehicle by which infinitely that unconscious God could come to know what is his true nature. And creation allowed then, and then emerging into creation were individual, what Baba called drop souls from the infinite ocean of unconscious God. And each individual drop soul experiencing itself as separate began the very long journey of consciousness to move from unconscious to completely conscious God. And it did so through the evolution of consciousness through forms. It did so then through, once consciousness was fully developed in the human form, it did it through reincarnating in the human form. And then finally, in the last session, we saw it finally got to the point where it was ready to actually begin to directly inquire about the true nature of the drop soul. And then that then begins the approach toward the spiritual path. And what we said was the dilemma that the drop soul faces then is the accumulated karma and the accumulated sanskaras, especially that have been inherited over the course of this evolution in forms, and then additionally through the process of reincarnation. And those sanskaras, or mental impressions, are the things that really hide or serve as a veil between the individual drop soul and their true nature. And so then the task at that point for the individual who's interested and motivated to actually find out what is their true nature is to effect the unwinding of those sanskaras. And Baba, of course, gave different methods of ascetic practices and selfless service and others in order to help bring about that unwinding. But as it turns out, Baba said, actually the most efficacious way of effecting this unwinding of sanskaras is through having a relationship with and ultimately surrendering to a master who themselves has already fulfilled the journey, that they've already discovered who they really are, that they are infinite in consciousness and so on, and that they are in the best position to help the aspirant to actually proceed in their own journey in consciousness. And so that's where we are as a recap of where we've been in the journey in consciousness so far. So this session, we're going to focus on the role of the master. Who is the master? And how do you recognize a genuine master, and what's their role? And what does it mean to actually be a follower or a disciple of such a master? So that's where we're headed in this session. And I'm going to start us off here. I'm going to again share the screen. India, let's start in India. And I recall hearing that Baba had said, and I didn't get a citation for this, but that Baba had said that India actually, of all the places on earth, is the closest to what Baba called the Om point, which is the point at which creation oozes out of infinite unconscious God from the beyond state. And so India has a very special place, and that part of the world has a special place, a very special spiritually prominent place, because it's where one finds a preponderance of people who are actually in advanced stages of consciousness. But India is really well known for a lot of things. It's known for an extraordinary culture. It's known for amazing architecture. It's known for, it's got a tradition of education. It's got beautiful mountains in the Himalayas. It's got beautiful other places. And it also, as we know, has a great deal of poverty and a great deal of disease. India was the birthplace of two major world religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, and it's also spawned a number of other religions that are significant, Jainism and Sikhism being two of them. And also it's home to 200 million Muslims. But beyond religion, it's also known as a place of spirituality through the plethora of beings who are on higher planes of consciousness, many of whom are what are called sadhus, which are seekers, or some are actually saints on advanced planes of consciousness, and a very few are what Baba would term God realized. So Baba has given an understanding about these different states of consciousness that is unsurpassed. It's comprehensive, it's authoritative, it's pragmatic. For in the end, most souls will be transiting through these different stages of advanced consciousness in their progression back to the source. And the understanding of this does provide extremely valuable guideposts and reference points for that journey. But the understanding of these inner planes and these different stages of consciousness actually has another benefit, because it helps foster the longing for the unfoldment itself. And longing is one of the, if not the most potent force that can motivate a dropped soul to undertake what is an enormously rigorous and demanding and long path. For this is not merely about gaining an intellectual understanding, but in focusing on understanding this aspect of conscious evolution, the heart begins to open as it intuitively begins to recognize the possibilities that exist and can see even a distant glimpsing of its glorious future state. So in this session, we'll be talking about those who have arrived at this end state, drawing on Baba's explanations largely derived from his discourses on the man-God and the avatar. But before we go there, let's talk a little bit, or let's hear what Baba had to say about the value of this kind of study. He said, of all the subjects of human study, God is the most meaningful, but purely theoretical study of God does not take the aspirant very far toward the real purpose of human life. It is always better to study God than to be ignorant of him. It is better to feel God than to study him. It is better to experience God than to feel God. And it is better to become God than to experience him. So when we're finally starting to shift our focus from the outside world to examining our own nature, our sanskaras have already begun to be reduced to a certain degree, but there's still loads of them left to be dealt with. And while, as I said a moment ago, Baba places one means far higher than all the others in its efficacy of removing samskara, and that is through surrender to the one who has already achieved that ultimate state of consciousness, and through that surrenderance to live a life of love, obedience to that one who's rightly termed a master. But what is a master? Baba refers to people on different planes of consciousness. So there are people on the first plane, second plane, and so on. And each of these souls is in a highly advanced state compared to an individual who is yet on the gross plane. However, the difference in consciousness of someone on the first plane will be radically different from the consciousness of a master on the sixth plane. And the experience of a master on the sixth plane, Baba says, is still infinitely distant from the experience of the seventh plane, which is Godhood. Further, the powers and capacities of one on the lower planes is vastly different from one on the higher plane. And finally, it is only a master on the fifth or sixth plane who has the ability to bring one individual up to the plane they're on, but no farther. So when understanding this, one might say that even though there are people at different levels, one would always be better off spiritually by following a master on any plane higher than the plane that one is on, as they can bring you farther up to the level that they themselves have attained. But actually, Baba places no importance on any individual achieving the experiences of the planes of consciousness. He's said that going from one plane to another is like trading one set of binding chains for another. And though it may seem we're trading up to go from having iron chains to having gold chains, Baba has told us they are both chains and fall infinitely short of the goal of it all, which is to achieve the final state of infinite consciousness, to know ourselves as God. He also cautions us that the allurements of these planes can be diversionary. And if we're actually not fully prepared for the experience of these planes, they can actually hinder one's spiritual progress. So in that regard, Baba advises that one should seek out a master who has already achieved the full infinite state of consciousness. But who are these masters? Baba describes them as either a man-god or a God-man. Here's what Baba had to say about that. Baba says, a man-god is one who has transited all the way through the evolutionary, reincarnation, and involutionary paths and has made the ultimate transition into their own identity as God. Only when it attains God realization on the seventh plane can the soul fully control its joy. The unlimited happiness that is eternally his does not in any way unbalance the person because he is now permanently established in the poise of non-duality. The extravagance of newly found love and joy is no longer for him. Occasional unsettlement due to increasing joy at the closer proximity of God is also finished because he is now inseparably united with him. He is lost in the divine beloved and merged in him who is the infinite ocean of unbounded happiness. The happiness of the God-realized person is unconditional and self-sustained. It is therefore eternally the same without ebb and flow. He has arrived at unqualified finality and unassailable equanimity. Such beings are rare. Baba said there are actually always 56 such perfect beings at any one time in the universe. And by their very nature, they're not necessarily well known. In fact, very few of them are much known. Their state is only recognized by those who have a high degree of spiritual attunement, and especially those who have connections from past lives with that master. The connection with such a being is a boon, according to Baba. Just a moment in the presence of such a one, sometimes referred to as receiving, quote, darshan, which means seeing. Even a moment in the presence is of greater value than 100 years of sincere prayer, meditation, and penance. This kind of contact wipes away innumerable sanskaras and makes the path forward far easier and assured for the aspirant. As such, it is only for those who are genuine and sincere in their aspiration toward God who tend to get the immense opportunity associated with the contact with such a one. These 56 man-gods all share the same state of consciousness, since infinite consciousness is one. Some of these man-gods, upon achieving their state of realization, drop their bodies to abide eternally in their God state. Some of them maintain their connection to their bodies, but have no other functional roles. Yet, contact with them remains much sought after by many spiritually attuned individuals for the benefit of having their darshan. I have a good friend who grew up in a rural part of Pakistan, And he said he was surrounded by such advanced beings that they would come upon all over the place, in the forests, in towns, and so on. And it was common practice for the people there to seek out the company of these advanced beings simply for the elevated atmosphere that was always there around them. Now, some of these beings have limited roles. They have the power to bring one other up to their state of godhood. And these beings are called majubs, which is an Arabic word, and it means absorbed. And examples of majubs would be the great Sufi poets Hafez and Rumi. However, in spite of the sameness of their state, they may have different natures because they retain a personality even upon achieving God realization that is of the same quality as they had prior to gaining realization. In simple terms, some are of the Jamali type, which is of a gentle nature, and some are of the Jalali type, which is a fiery nature. But what one sees on the exterior is just a covering over what the reality is of their true nature, which is beyond any duality of experience, gentle or fiery. They also may behave very differently. Some may seem very easygoing and behave in keeping with the mores and customs of their surroundings, while others may completely ignore the expectations of those around them, even behaving in ways that seem odd or mad. So it's not possible to judge such a one by their nature or their behavior. There's only one way to judge one, which is whether there is an awakening in the heart of the aspirant by being in their presence. And even then, one can only determine whether this is one with whom one has a connection. For if there is no basis for connection, there may be no feeling whatsoever. For a true, perfect one can veil themselves from whoever they choose and reveal themselves in the hearts of those with whom they do have a connection. When I, many years ago, was with Neem Karoli Baba, a very great master in Kanchi in India in 1972, there were those I saw who would come into the ashram and they would fall on their knees weeping out of the inner recognition of their master. And then there were others who would come there and spend days and feel nothing. And so again, it was all about connection. It is not necessarily advantageous for an individual to prematurely connect with such a one. Rather, the true master knows when the time is right. And at that point, the true master will create exactly those circumstances, both inner and outer, by which the connection is made. Now, about perfect masters. Of this 56 God-realized beings, there are always 5 of these man gods who collectively take on the responsibility for the spiritual well-being and progression of all in creation. Baba has said as follows: a rare few God-realized souls not only possess God consciousness, but are also conscious of creation and their own bodies. They take active interest in the souls who are in bondage, and they use their own bodies consciously to work in creation in order to help other souls in their Godward march. Such a God-realized soul is called man God, perfect master, Sadguru, Kutub, or Salik-i-Mukamil. The man God experiences himself as the center of the entire universe, and everyone, high or low, good or bad, is at the same distance from him. Some of the better known examples of more recent times are Sai Baba of Shirdi and Ramakrishna Paramahansa, though Baba also said that St. Francis became a perfect master. And there's also some reason to believe that Swami Vivekananda, Ramakrishna's main disciple, was raised up to being a perfect master. Every perfect master has a circle of 12 close disciples, and they arrange for the realization, and the perfect master arranges for the realization of these 12. But there are also many who are followers, sometimes thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions, who receive great benefits through their connection to the perfect master, simply by being in their presence and having darshan. Sai Baba is perhaps one of the most widely recognized, more contemporary figures in India. You see his face all over the place in India. Like Meher Baba, Sai lived the life of a fakir, residing in his final years in a dusty village called Shirdi in Maharashtra in the central part of India. He lived an austere life. It's said when he slept, it was on the ground using a rock for a pillow. And while he had disciples during his life, he was not widely known as he is today. Then that all changed. And a number of years ago, there was a movie and a TV series about Sai Baba, and it emphasized his ability to perform miracles. And overnight, Shirdi went from being a tiny village to a huge town. And if one goes to Shirdi today, about 50,000 people will come for darshan at his temple on a normal day. And on a holiday, somewhere between 250 and 500,000 people will come for darshan. And what do they come for? Because they receive miracles from him, even though he's been out of his body for 100 years. Such is the power and importance of such a being. But his role was so much beyond this. For Sai Baba was the head of the perfect masters, or what is known as the Kutub-i-Irshad, and thus carried the ultimate responsibility, not just for his disciples and those who would come after, but for the universe as a whole and its progression of consciousness. In that sense, it is said that Sai Baba was responsible for all that happened and the working through of sanskaras on a massive scale for people. For example, it has been said that Sai Baba was responsible for the execution of World War I, though I don't know if Baba ever confirmed this. It is simply beyond human comprehension what the nature of consciousness of these perfect ones is. Baba said, don't even begin to try to imagine it. But they are connected to every single other being in creation, and they're also beyond creation simultaneously. Can we imagine this? No, but it is possible to experience the atmosphere of love and the elevation of consciousness that one feels when around such beings. An experience that can tell us that there is far more happening here than is apparent on the surface. Or to paraphrase one of the great mystical poets, there's far more happening behind the curtain than what one sees happening on the stage. Typically, perfect masters do not emphasize one particular spiritual method, as they recognize that the path to God is completely individual based on each one's sanskaric makeup and karmic requirements. They also do not always advocate a renunciate lifestyle, except for a select few. They may more naturally recommend a married worldly life to some and emphasize a life of greater austerity to others. But for the most of their followers, these perfect masters tend to emphasize love, obedience, and surrender. Now, this from Meher Baba. If a person accepts without reserve from the bounty the man-God showers, he creates a link that will stand by him until he attains freedom and God realization. If a person serves the man-God, offering his life and all possessions in his service, he creates a link that will augment his spiritual progress by inviting upon himself the grace and help of the man-God. In fact, even opposition to the work of the man-God often turns out to be a beginning of development that imperceptibly leads a person Godward, because while opposing the work of the man-God, the soul is establishing a link and a contact with him. Thus, everyone who voluntarily or involuntarily comes into the orbit of his activities becomes in some way the recipient of a spiritual push. So, overall, the perfect masters are there to execute a spiritual trajectory that's set in place for all in creation. But how is this overall trajectory conceived? Together with all the beings on the planes, the perfect masters make up the spiritual hierarchy, with the Kutub-i-Irshad at the head of it. as Baba has said, in the Sufi tradition, the Qutub controls the whole universe through his agents. Baba says there are 7,000 members of this spiritual hierarchy, with fixed numbers of those on the various planes, and together they are agents of the perfect masters. And this is a continuous responsibility exercised by the spiritual hierarchy to ensure the continuing progress of beings in creation toward the ultimate goal. And this spiritual hierarchy functions like this with one very significant exception, and that is when the God-man appears, who then takes on the preeminent role in the spiritual hierarchy. So let's talk about the God-man. The rule is that every being in creation ascends through form, reincarnation, and involution until they reach godhood. Every realized being has achieved their state as the culmination of countless lives of evolution, reincarnation, and involution. They've achieved it through extraordinary experiences of suffering, service, and surrender to a perfect one. In other words, most individuals progress to godhood through an ascent up the forms and eventually through the planes. However, there is one important exception to this rule, according to Baba, and also according to other major mystical traditions. Periodically, there is the appearance within creation of one who has come directly from the God state into the human form with the express purpose of giving a major spiritual push to creation and to mapping out the next epoch of advancement of all souls in creation, human and otherwise, as they progress toward the ultimate goal that all will eventually reach. This one personage is termed the avatar, which is the Sanskrit word which means, quote, descent, or, quote, descent into darkness or creation, which is what Baba refers to sometimes as the shadow of God. In other words, the avatar descends directly from the state of godhood into creation without going through the process of ascent that is common to all other beings in creation. Baba has given explanations about the avatar in which he says that the avatar comes generally about every 700 to 1400 years. When he comes, Baba says it is invariably in a male form, though perfect masters and other masters can be either male or female. And the avatar does not go through a spiritual development process. In fact, Baba says the avatar is actually was the first soul in creation who actually mastered the ascent into the state of godhood by his own effort. And he has assumed responsibility for periodically returning to creation throughout eternity to help ensure that all those in creation are able to continue to advance in their own journey back to God. Baba says that when it is the time for the appearance or advent of the avatar, the perfect masters of that time arrange the details of his birth and of his upbringing to the point when the avatar is unveiled to his own original nature as God and undergoes preparation for his role as avatar of the age. Baba explained the context in which the avatar appears. The avatar appears in different forms under different names at different times and in different parts of the world. As his appearance always coincides with the spiritual regeneration of man, the period immediately preceding his manifestation is always one in which humanity suffers from the pangs of the approaching rebirth. Man seems more than ever enslaved by desire, more than ever driven by greed, held by fear, swept by anger. The strong dominate the weak, the rich oppress the poor. Large masses of people are exploited for the benefit of the few who are in power. The individual who finds no peace or rest seeks to forget himself in excitement. Immorality increases, crime flourishes, religion is ridiculed. Corruption spreads throughout the social order. Class and national hatreds are aroused and fostered. Wars break out. Humanity grows desperate. There seems to be no possibility of stemming the tide of destruction. At this moment, the avatar appears, being the total manifestation of God in human form. He is like a gauge against which man can measure what he is and what he may become. He trues the standard of human values by interpreting them in terms of divinely human life. In those who contact him, he awakens a love that consumes all selfish desires in the flame of the one desire to serve him. Those who consecrate their lives to him gradually become identified with him in consciousness. Little by little, their humanity is absorbed into his divinity and they become free. Baba said that in our recorded history, the avatar has come as Zoroaster being the earliest, Buddha, Rama, Krishna, Jesus, Muhammad, and now he's come again. Baba says, I was Rama, I was Krishna, I was this one, I was that one, and now I am Meher Baba. I am that ancient one whose past is worshipped and remembered, whose present is ignored and forgotten, and whose future advent is anticipated with great fervor and longing. There have been countless cycles of time before our recorded period of history, and there have been countless appearances of the avatar before Zoroaster, the earliest recorded appearance of the avatar, just as there will be countless appearances after Meher Baba. Baba said that each time the avatar comes, he brings the same message. He does not come to create a religion, though a religion is invariably created in the wake of his advent as the overall atmosphere surrounding his advent gradually dissipates. But his purpose is more far-reaching. It is to quicken the life of the spirit in his time and to provide opportunity for advancement that is far more accessible than it had been prior to the advent. Overall, the purpose of the avatar's advent is to make the possibility of a direct personal relationship with God tangible and available to each one by having God take on a human form and living a life of pure love. At the time of Meher Baba, the five perfect masters who precipitated Baba's advent were Sai Baba of Shirdi, a fakir who is known as both a Hindu and a Muslim, Upasi Maharaj, a Hindu, Tajuddin Baba, a Muslim, Hazrat Babajan, a woman Muslim, and Narayan Maharaj, a Hindu. Each of these perfect masters played a different role in Baba's unveiling and preparation. Babajan awakened Baba, who was 19 at the time, to his timeless and infinite state with a kiss to his forehead, propelling him from a normal state of consciousness to infinite consciousness. Sai Baba was the head of the perfect masters, also known as the Kutub Irshad. Oops. Excuse me for a moment. There we are. And Sai Baba handed responsibility for preparation of Baba to Upasi Maharaj, who was Sai Baba's main disciple. Upasni played the major role in preparing Baba for his avatar mission. Tajuddin is very widely known in that part of the world, though hardly known at all in our part of the world. And Narayan both played less visible roles, but all five were responsible for ascertaining the exact timing and means by which the avatar was unveiled. In the time of Jesus, John the Baptist was a perfect master, and he played the role of unveiling Jesus. Less seems to be known about the circumstances by which the other advents of the avatar came about. But for all of them, Baba has said that the message is always the same, though emphasis changes based on particular needs of the age. So in Buddha's time, because there was so much rampant materialism, Buddha placed the emphasis for peoples on non-attachment. In the time of Krishna, there was a general malaise in the land, so his message emphasized joy. In the time of Jesus, there was widespread cruelty, so his message was of love and caring for one another. And Baba indicated that the greatest need of this time is the universal awakening of the heart of humanity. Of course, the emphasis the avatar gives is always to help correct the imbalances of the time and the society in which the avatar appears. And the message overall remains the same: to love God, find God in one another, and find God ultimately as one's own self. The power of the Advent, Mayor Baba says, remains strong for 100 to 200 years after he drops his body. And it is just as strong as when the avatar is physically present, so that anyone can have a direct personal relationship with the avatar during that time, even in spite of the fact that the avatar is no longer in the body. But after some time, the atmosphere that surrounded the Advent begins to fade. And at that time, there begins to be the codification and rigidification that ultimately forms a religion based on the avatar, in spite of the fact that the avatar does not come to create a religion. Here's what Baba said. Avatar periods are like the spring tide of creation. They bring a new release of power, a new awakening of consciousness, a new experience of life, not merely for a few, but for all. Qualities of energy and awareness, which had been used and enjoyed by only a few advanced souls, are made available for all humanity. Life as a whole is stepped up to a higher level of consciousness, is geared to a new rate of energy. The transition from sensation to reason was one such step. The transition from reason to intuition will be another. Now, Meher Baba has said that those who are ready can come into contact with a perfect master or the avatar, and through that contact, develop a relationship that will ultimately bring them through the byways of the spiritual path to the final destination of godhood and the fulfillment of the whim that was stirred in God in the beyond state when infinite but unconscious God asked the question. And through countless forms and then countless incarnations in the human form, the drop soul found innumerable false answer to this question of who am I? I'm a rock, I'm a carrot, I'm a fish, I'm a dog, I'm a human being, I'm a king, I'm a beggar, I'm smart, I'm ignorant, I'm evil, I'm good, I'm nothing. To finally turning inward to asking the question about one's actual being nature, so as to eventually answer the question as I am infinite consciousness and infinite bliss, that is, I am God. So what is the work of the avatar? The avatar charts out the spiritual destiny of all those in creation, and he helps move it along, giving it a spiritual push. He does this in concert with the spiritual hierarchy. In Baba's lifetime, he noted 2 occasions specifically in which he had meetings with the spiritual hierarchy to create this plan. One was in a cave in 1932 outside Assisi, Italy, that St. Francis was said to have utilized, and in which Baba said the spiritual future of humanity was charted for the next 2,000 years. Another meeting of the spiritual hierarchy took place on Fallenfluh in Switzerland, and you can see by the arrow where it was on Fallenfluh that it occurred. Baba did note that there were other such meetings. The avatar creates the map and then apportions responsibility across the spiritual hierarchy to help carry out the plan. The purpose of the plan is to foster spiritual awakening throughout creation. The work of the avatar ultimately shifts and raises consciousness universally. So what is the difference between the perfect master and the man God or the avatar? There is no difference in consciousness. There is difference in the role and scope of the role. And Baba says a perfect master only functions as such when he or she is in the physical form. But when they drop their body, they are no longer functioning as such, while the avatar continues to function as if he is still in the body for that period of 100 to 200 years after he drops the physical form. And that is the period that we're currently in, Baba having dropped the form in 1969. So it will be at least until 2069 or beyond that we will be in that period. And while it may appear that a perfect master is still functioning as a master after he or she has dropped their body, it is through the agency of the avatar or some other incarnate God-realized master that the blessing of the deceased perfect master's contact with their followers continues. In God Speaks, Mayor Baba has also given some pointers about how can one recognize a genuine perfect master. He says, an ordinary man may not be able to discriminate satisfactorily between the different stages of spiritual attainment up to the sixth plane. He may be able to know that such souls are advanced, but not the extent of their advancement. But when a sincere and patient seeker of truth comes into contact with one who is spiritually perfect, he will observe certain outer signs that are inseparably associated with inner spiritual perfection. The most important of these signs are three. Firstly, perfection is not only, quote, oneness with God, but the continual and uninterrupted experience of, quote, oneness in everything. A perfect master continually, without break, experiences and realizes his own self as the self in all. This inner experience objectively manifests itself in the spontaneity of love that such a one feels or expresses towards all creation. To him, nothing is attractive or repulsive. Good and bad, saint and sinner, beauty and ugliness, wisdom and idiocy, health and disease, all are modes of his own manifestation. The second sign is the atmosphere of bliss that perfection radiates in its immediate vicinity, and that a stranger in search of it cannot help feeling. A perfect master not only enjoys infinite bliss, but also experiences universal suffering. The acuteness of suffering, however, is nullified or subdued by the overwhelming feeling of bliss in the face of every kind of suffering and persecution. The third sign of perfection is its power to adapt itself to any level of humanity. It can be as nonchalant on a throne as in a gutter. It can very naturally be thrifty with the poor, extravagant with the rich, regal with kings, wise with the learned, and simple with the illiterate and the ignorant. Just as a master of letters teaches English in different ways to beginners and graduate students, so also a perfect master adapts himself to the level of those whom he wants to uplift spiritually. Now, the next important question is, how do we differentiate a perfect one from others, such as souls on the earlier planes who mistakenly believe they're realized because of how overwhelming their experience is on the planes, or differentiate itself from souls on the intermediate planes who are advanced but not yet fully realized? Or how do we differentiate a perfect one from ordinary people who pose as masters, or who may sincerely believe that they're masters, but do not actually possess the ability to help others along the path and could even hinder their progress? And there have, of course, been well-publicized cases of people who are taken as masters and then are found to have fallen prey to one or another of the beguiling temptations accorded to them by their followers. Also, let's clarify what it means to be able to help others. There are different kinds of help, but the spiritual help that Baba is referring to seems to be the ability of the master to actually effect the eradication of the remaining sense scars of the disciple so they may achieve God realization. And it should be noted, this help is not confined to a single lifetime. In fact, any true relationship with a genuine master will persist over several lifetimes, with it being reestablished in each one. Because of a concern with about being confident in one's ability to recognize a genuine master, or other reasons, for some seekers, the dilemma of discerning who is a real master becomes such a burden that they eschew the benefits of having a genuine master to guide them and decide to go it alone. This, of course, avoids the potential for them being deceived on their part or even entrapped with a false master. but it also does mean giving up the enormous potential for assistance that's extremely helpful on the path. So there are no ready-made answers to the question of whether to follow a master. In fact, if a genuine master contacts an individual, it is generally someone with whom that master already has a connection. And using often the most ordinary means, that master becomes present in the person's life in one way or another. It may be through a book, a lecture, hearing about them from another person, a dream, a vision, or through the opportunity to come into actual physical contact with the master. It is also not essential that contact be from a master physically. In fact, a God-realized master is infinite. The God-realized master knows him or herself to actually be the inner reality inside every individual. So when one meets a God-realized master, whatever transpires physically is often of far less significance than what actually transpires inside the disciple's own being. For it is an actual fact that the master is none other than the disciple's higher self, and it is in one's heart that one truly meets a master. Any connection with someone who purports to be a master is only genuine if there is a corresponding resonance inside the deepest part of one's own heart. Anything less than this either suggests that the person is not a genuine master, or the person is a genuine master, but there's no connection between the master and that person, or the person is a genuine master, but the timing for that connection to manifest hasn't yet come. Bob has indicated that when one becomes drawn to a genuine master, there's an awakening of love inside the being of the aspirant with the master. That is the truest indication that one has a connection with the master. Baba has also indicated that a real master will often give scope for the would-be disciple to test the masters to see if they're authentic. However, the impulse to test the master cannot be a superficial one, but must spring from an earnest inquiry in the heart of the disciple to know whether a particular master is genuine and is theirs or not. Once the master has provided the necessary response to such inquiries, then no further testing of the master is generally either encouraged or even allowed. On the other hand, often a master will find ways to test the would-be disciples to see how true is their sincerity. These tests are very much tailored to the unique samskaric makeup of the disciple. A genuine master would never ask one to do something that would violate their own conscience. Baba goes further to say that if there ever appears to be a conflict between one's own conscience and the master, one should always follow one's own conscience. But he does say that any true introspection into the conflict will reveal that the master's guidance is invariably correct. Generally, genuine masters, with some exceptions, do not prescribe methodologies, but rather emphasize the direct relationship between the aspirant with the master as the primary vehicle of spiritual development. The choice of a master by a disciple is actually not the choice by the disciple. It's actually the choice of the master, though it may appear that the disciple is the one that is actually making the choice. But it is well within the capacity of a genuine master to arrange those circumstances, external and internal, for the disciple to recognize and then commit themselves, otherwise known as surrendering, to the master. As a well-known phrase indicates, when the disciple is ready, the master will appear. So, what is the commitment a disciple makes to a master when he or she surrenders? The three foremost commitments are love, obedience, and surrender. Love involves the continual feeling of the master in one's heart and allowing that feeling to be expressed in and penetrate through all the interactions and experiences one has in one's life. Obedience means following the master's orders and directives. This includes following any explicit orders or instructions given by the master, but it also means learning to follow the master's orders implicitly through tuning oneself to feeling inside the master's preference and dictates within, and following these over one's own preferences or desires. And surrender means seeking to find and acknowledge the master's hand in all that one experiences, accepting in one's heart that all the experiences are an expression of the working of the master to free them from the bondage of illusion. Now, there are also two techniques that often a genuine master often will ask of the disciple. The first is remembrance, which is the continual focus on the master inwardly. And the second is service, which means taking on the work of the master as one's primary commitment and focus. Again, this may be work given, the master is given directly or through intuition, but in doing the work, the only thought the disciple is to have is of pleasing the master. So, having said all of this, how important then is the master? Well, the great poet and God-realized being Hafez speaks about the need for a master when he says, "Without a guide, do not try to enter the path of love. I have failed hundreds of times by doing so." And Maulana Rumi, a perfect one, whose Masnavi Baba was fond of citing, corroborates Hafez when he says, "Had not Maulana Rumi been the slave of Shamsi Tabriz, he would never have become a perfect master." So in this session, we've covered a great deal of important perspectives that Baba's provided. This session is predicated on the understanding that once the drop soul has begun to shift its focus on eliminating its own false identifications, it is now ready to begin to focus on its own true nature, which is to uncover its real identity. And when this happens, this can be considered the individual has begun to approach the spiritual path. And Baba says the actual spiritual path only begins at the beginning of the process of involution. This is a very long and arduous path that will take the individual through immense challenges and suffering, but also bring it into extraordinary experiences and ultimately the final realization of itself as infinite. But this path can be filled with challenges that can become obstacles or distractions or even backward movement. But with the help of a genuine master who has already completed the traversing of the path, the aspirant's way is made safe, secure, and assured. We have looked at the different types of masters and focused in particular on the man-God and especially the perfect masters in the avatar. Mayor Baba asserts he is the avatar of this age. So our next session, we're going to explore that assertion in depth. But as a prelude to that session, I want to read you Mayor Baba's own statement about his avatarhood. It's called The Universal Message. And he says, "I have come not to teach, but to awaken. Understand, therefore, that I lay down no precepts. Throughout eternity, I have laid down principles and precepts, but mankind has ignored them. Man's inability to live God's words makes the avatar's teaching a mockery. Instead of practicing the compassion he taught, man has waged crusades in his name. Instead of living the humility, purity, and truth of his words, man has given way to hatred, greed, and violence. Because man has been deaf to the principles and precepts laid down by God in the past, in this present avataric form, I observe silence. You have asked for and been given enough words. It is now time to live them. To get nearer and nearer to God, you have to get further and further away from I, my, and mine. You have not to renounce anything but your own self. It is as simple as that, though found to be almost impossible. It is possible for you to renounce your limited self by my grace. I have come to release that grace. I repeat, I lay down no precepts. When I release the tide of truth, which I have come to give, men's daily lives will be the living precept. The words I have not spoken will come to life in them. I veil myself from man by his own curtain of ignorance and I manifest my glory to a few. My present avataric form is the last incarnation of this cycle of time. Hence, my manifestation will be the greatest. When I break my silence, the impact of my love will be universal, and all life in creation will know, feel, and receive of it. It will help every individual to break himself free from his own bondage in his own way. I am the divine beloved who loves you more than you can ever love yourself. The breaking of my silence will help you to help yourself in knowing your real self. All this world confusion and chaos was inevitable, and no one is to blame. What had to happen has happened, and what has to happen will happen. There was and is no way out except through my coming in your midst. I had to come, and I have come. I am the Ancient One. This is obviously an extraordinary claim. If true, it is the fulfillment of what so many religions and others have sought for the ages, what Christians call the second coming, or the Jews call the return of the Messiah. There are those who believe it to be a statement of supreme egotism, and some who have reacted strongly to this claim, though surprisingly few. However, there are many, many more who have come up against this claim, tested it against their own inner resonance, and found it to feel reliable. So up to now, we have focused on, in the Journey in Consciousness, on Meher Baba's teachings about the nature of creation and the progress through the journey in consciousness. The next two sessions, we're actually going to focus on Meher Baba's life and work. So we'll be able to explore more about Meher Baba next time, so you can make up your own mind. So with that, I'd like to have a moment of silence that we can share once more. Thank you. Once again, I want to express my appreciation to folks who have helped out with this seminar, with the advisors, Rich Bloom, Molly Leach, James O'D, Ward Parks, Ali Lawton, who's my technology partner, and Michelle McKeever, who's been a great help, especially with the website, the photographs, the beautiful paintings by Marika Popovits that have been spread throughout all of these sessions, and also the beautiful music of Kristen Hoffman that opens up every session. I want to invite all of you who would like to stay on. We're going to have a breakout session and then open discussion. And just to say what the breakout session is going to be is we're going to focus on the question of about sharing our experiences or perspectives about what is about how about whether or how a perfect master, how about following a master may have been significant for us on our own spiritual journey. So let's find out from one another about how we resonate with what's been talked about here. So I do invite all of you to stay on. We'll take a minute to allow those who are not going to be part of that to drop off, and then we'll form ourselves into some breakout groups. Thank you.